Hi, it's Shannon, the integrative practitioner. I am going to teach a live video today on the authentic self. And the authentic self in my life and work is the embodied enlightened self. Stay with me here. The embodied enlightened self, or as I'm calling it, the authentic self, is how we create space inside, either somatically or through the subtle energy body, to compassionately witness all of our traumatized parts or our conditioning or our inner child or inner children into the mosaic of our true nature, our true selves. I am teaching embodied wholeness. Embodied wholeness, trauma-informed spirituality meets realistic trauma-informed care. So much of the time, trauma recovery leaves out spiritual components, which can be purpose and meaning or something greater than oneself. And a lot of times in the spiritual communities, trauma is bypassed. Neither one of these ultimately work. Someone who wants to integrate into their whole self and become their embodied, authentic self. And so that is what I teach. And that is what I'm here to explain a little bit more about. Our authentic self is really misunderstood. We live in a culture where so many folks are very conditioned and highly traumatized, and many people do not know that they are highly conditioned or traumatized. And so they walk through the world as their conditioned self, and they haven't examined cultural conditioning. They haven't considered trauma, and they walk through the world and start to suffer. They start to suffer because of a lot of reasons, mainly being out of alignment with your authentic nature. Your head and your heart are misaligned. Trauma causes a lot of fragmentation, but so does society can cause fragmentation when the society itself is looking like a bunch of trauma beliefs that are unprocessed and looking like a culture. And we can start to suffer. We can start to suffer when we go along in the world and something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right, and we are only allowed to show up in these really narrow, small boxes of being. So America is a great example because America, you're allowed to be someone, but only in a career sense and only for some people. And to be the true self is to, and the authentic self is to be whole in all environments, all contexts. That means your actual life and your career. And a lot of times this isn't welcomed. And so we may shrink, or we may, sometimes the trauma response has us just being like a one-trick pony and keep doing the thing that we have been rewarded. We have been rewarded either through our workplace, our family, our society, and we will keep doing that thing until doing that thing causes the suffering. There's a lot of ways that we can suffer. And the root of the suffering is a lot of times being out of alignment with who you really are in your heart, and being forced to conform. We're living in times of great uncertainty, and so folks are grasping onto different ways to get certainty, and they are outsourcing their decision making, their agency, and their inner knowing to groupthink. And so this is why we're going to see the rise of cults. That's why that's happening right now. And the authentic, true nature of ourselves is misunderstood. It's even misunderstood, as I wrote in my last Stack article, by well-meaning practitioners in the world that believe that the authentic self is selfish. The authentic self is not selfish. The authentic self is whole. And wholeness requires all the light and all of the shadow to be contained in the beingness. Now, when we go on a healing journey, if we truly want to seek wholeness, the shadow does need to be looked at, and the shadow wants to be integrated. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. My favorite way to do that is self-inquiry and somatically, to be able to look at that. But we can also do it mystically as well, to embody more and more wholeness. Essentially, the authentic self is the one who is witnessing all the thoughts, all of the parts, all of the trauma responses, all of the ways in which you may shapeshift if you're a trauma survivor, neurodivergent, or complex trauma survivor in the world in order to survive. The authentic self is the one who witnesses all. And that requires a lot of inner work to become or know that you are the one that is becoming aware of being aware, and to know that you are the one that is witnessing all thoughts and phenomena arise within the screen of awareness and within your own body. What's really cool is that same one is your authentic self, which is your physical body. Your body can love, compassionately tend, and witness and be with all of the phenomenon, all of the trauma parts, your inner children, all of the suffering, and bring that into more and more embodied wholeness. Physical space will be created inside to lovingly witness all of your parts, all of your trauma into wholeness in the way that I practice. Over and over again, I hear from those that I work with that they have done decades of therapy, and in a couple months, their nervous system expands to create space. And they're so surprised to find out that there's more space to be authentic. There's more space to be rather than do or fake it and make it or freeze or hustle until burnout. There's actually more options. And that's what the authentic self is about. It's about all of the options. The authentic self heals in degrees. So we can take the polarity of selflessness and selfishness. Oftentimes, it looks like the polarity of codependency and possibly narcissism. What's happened here in the whole spectrum is the lack of individuation. The lack of individuation has caused either polarity to express as far as trauma protection. Being overly selfish is a system that is working really hard to protect the very fragile sense of self. Being codependent is dissociating from the self in order to attend to the other as another form of protection mechanism. They're different sides of the coin. And unfortunately, the spiritual community has really misunderstood this dynamic because it's rooted in trauma. A lot of times this dynamic is listed as twin flame, the runner and the chaser. Now, there can be a karmic component, but if we haven't looked at the physical nature of the body and physical trauma responses, even trauma responses that are inherited through our ancestors, through our lineages, we really want to start to look at that because that's where we can bring more and more wholeness into being. Now, we heal and we must, if we have complex trauma, individuate, which means there may be a temporary piece of the healing journey where we do have to be a little bit more selfish. Now, there's a sensitive timing on this so that we don't harm those that we are in relationship if we still want to stay in relationship with them. But this is the individuation process happening. On the other side of the coin, someone who is very selfish may need to spend some time being a little bit more selfless to come more into right relationship with the self. The self is not only in relationship with the self, but the self is in relationship to the other and all others. So we work towards coming more and more into interdependence. I hope this has helped you understand the authentic self or the enlightened self a little bit better. have some comments in the comment section.